Just a couple of brief questions that I have myself. The first one, if you want to venture an answer to it, great. If not, I'll excuse the witnesses that are before us, but it's picking up on a comment that Deputy Curran made earlier on regarding removing the mandatory pension retirement. You made the point that, you know, issues have been raised or flagged regarding constitutional issues. Now, as we know here, historically in this country over the last decade, we dismissed with constitutional rights when we introduced legislation, emergency measures in the public interest, and surely dealing with the issue of mandatory retirement is an issue that's in the long-term economic interest of the country. So I think it is an area that shouldn't cause a problem that seems to be a problem that's been falsely created at the moment. Just Dr. Keane, earlier in your evidence, you were making the point in relation to women's participation, the fact that a quarter of people get less than the full rate, a substantial number of those, or the majority of those, are women, and women are forced to leave the workforce regarding childcare, and this is a huge issue. Now, the committee in its own submission to the Pension Commission made the point that people taking time off for homemaking reasons and caring should be facilitated to do so and get their credited contributions. It comes back to the comment that Dr. Rowntree made earlier on in relation to that 20-year threshold. But surely if we address that particular issue regarding homemaking credits in terms of carers' credits, and even go beyond the 20 years and not have an arbitrary cut-off, doesn't that add to the economic argument then to actually support childcare, to support women insofar as possible in the workforce, because you have at the other end then less credited contributions to give, particularly in relation to the homemaking element of it. And just if you could comment on that. Second question I have, again for the SRI, and that is, has any modelling been completed on the removal of the mandatory retirement age, removal of the barriers to people continuing in employment beyond the current retirement age, along with the recommendation in the Pension Commission here in relation to the removal of the age cap on PRSI? Surely that would bring in potentially a significant additional amount of PRSI contributions if it was done in tandem with a flexible approach to retirement. And the likelihood is, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what has happened in the US, what you've seen is that people are working considerably longer, but not necessarily working full-time. They have reduced hours as they continue longer. So you're getting the health benefits in relation to it. People aren't falling off a cliff in terms of retirement. They're continuing to work, maybe work less hours, getting a mix of a balance there between work and retirement, and still making an economic contribution. And of course there's the add-on impact of retaining that knowledge that has been built up within that employment sector. And just the final question that I have then is in relation to this 40-year versus 30-year threshold for full contributions. And isn't it the case today, like there is no one going into private sector employment today that is going to have either a 30 or a 40-year unblemished employment record? I think that's unattainable in the current working environment that we have at the moment. And doesn't that need then to be reflected in the total contributions approach that we take to pensions? So I'll start with the SRI and I'll let Mr. O'Connor come in if he wants to add anything.
Sure, and I think you brought up a really important thing, which often we sort of don't think about. the benefits of spending money. So if we spend money on childcare, we often just think about how much is childcare going to cost. And the Department for Children will probably be quite focused on how much will their subsidies cost. What we tend not to do a lot of is actually looking at the knock-on positives of that for the fiscal situation. So you're quite right in that while it might be costly to provide childcare subsidies, we're not really thinking in the long term, well, if we have more women in employment and we have women in employment for longer and perhaps higher hours, then of course there's a tax bonus to that. Just as if we have people working longer and we remove mandatory retirement ages, there's a positive, impact on our tax take. So I think it's really important that we think more about the sort of bigger picture. And certainly I'm a researcher, so obviously I'm going to call for more research, but there are, research can be done on that, on if we were to increase female participation, what would be the knock-on effect on taxes? How much more would we generate? So sort of how much would childcare subsidies become self-financing or partially self-financing? So I think that's one important sort of mind shift that we need. Then you talked about the removal of retirement age and the age cap, certainly, and the Commission is, really pushing for this. There's not just the economic benefits of people working longer. So, and again, I'm talking about people who want to work longer, who are in good health, that if they stay on longer, they'll pay more taxes. But also there's just positive health benefits for themselves. And that has a knock-on effect on the health system. So I think sort of thinking outside of what something might cost, but also the positives that might come from it and how savings can be made are also really good. And as well, how it will benefit people, that people's physical and mental health by not being forced to retire by a certain age can benefit. On the unblemished record of contributions, so I suppose there are situations where people can have credited contributions. But I think that flexibility and possibly allowing people like that, if somebody is 1 or 2 years short of a maximum contributions, then the fact that they'd be able to stay on longer and the Commission's recommendation that people can stay on longer and pay those contributions is a really positive one.
On that issue in relation to research, and naturally enough as a researcher you'd be positively disposed to it, can I also make the suggestion that in terms of either your own submission or that of the ESRI to the Creating Our Future call, that specific request regarding, the impact of investment on childcare in terms of our pensions and the positive impact of the removal of the retirement ban would have, both from an economic point of view, but also from a health and welfare point of view, that those two specific aspects of research could actually be looked at as part of the Creating Our Future initiative. Mr. O'Connor, do you want to come in?
Small point. I mean, as Dr. Keane said, I mean, for the total contributions, obviously when somebody is on a job seeker's benefit payment, for example, in a situation where they've lost their job, they get a credited contribution. But of course, it's sometimes the case that simply a contract comes to an end, someone might be travelling and they're not making up those contributions. So a cultural change that would benefit people would be giving people more awareness of the need to make those pension contributions throughout their working life, and it should simply be built in as a kind of an automatic cost. If someone is taking a year out, which has become a cultural norm, that people become more aware of the long-term cost of that, and making it simple and easy for people to make those contributions. And again, the Pensions Commission has a useful recommendation that people should be able to log on to MyGov or whatever and see their pension contributions, and have a much easier time of understanding what they're entitled to. And of course that needs to be on paper as well for those who are not using the internet, so that people can see what their entitlement is at a much earlier stage in their career.
I think Deputy O'Queeve would have direct experience of people that have missed out on contributions because they didn't make voluntary contributions, so I think we'd all agree that a more flexible approach in relation to that would be welcome.